3, 2, 1. The House Committee on the Judiciary will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. We welcome everyone to this morning's hearing on secrecy orders and prosecuting leaks, potential legislative responses to deter prosecutorial abuses of power. Before we begin, I would like to remind members that we've established an email address and distribution list dedicated to circulating exhibits, motions, or other written materials that members may want to offer as part of our hearing today. If you'd like to submit materials, please send them to the email address that has been previously distributed to your offices, and we will circulate the materials to members and staff as quickly as we can. For those in the room, current guidance from the Office of the Attending Physician is that individuals who are fully vaccinated for COVID-19 do not need to wear masks or maintain social distancing. Fully vaccinated individuals may, of course, choose to continue wearing masks based on their specific risk considerations. If you are not fully vaccinated, the Office of Attending Physician requires you to wear your mask and maintain 6 feet of social distance. Finally, I ask all members, both those in person and those appearing remotely, to mute your microphones when you are not speaking. This will help prevent feedback and other technical issues. You may unmute yourself anytime you seek recognition. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. On May 7th, 2021, the Washington Post reported that the Trump administration secretly obtained phone records and had sought email records of certain of its reporters. Later reports showed that the department made similar attempts to access the communications records of a CNN reporter and multiple journalists at the New York Times. On June 10th, it was reported that the Trump administration had also requested the records of multiple members of Congress, their family members, and congressional staff. On June 13th, the New York Times reported that the Trump administration had sought similar records from accounts associated with former White House counsel Don McGahn. Even if that were the end of the story, if all the department had done was target these reporters and these members of Congress this one time, we would have reason to be concerned. A free press is vital to our democratic system, and the Constitution grants extraordinary protections to the official communications of members of Congress and their staff. But of course, these reports do not constitute an isolated incident. The Department of Justice has a long history of targeting reporters and misusing its surveillance authorities to bypass basic constitutional protections. President Nixon's Justice Department tried to silence the publication of the Pentagon Papers. President Bush's Justice Department went after the reporters who helped expose the NSA's expansive warrantless surveillance programs. President Obama's Justice Department went so far as to charge a reporter as a co-conspirator in violation of the Espionage Act. President Trump's Justice Department appears to have targeted reporters and members who were focused on investigating Russia's interference in the 2016 election. And now we know that President Biden's Justice Department sought to renew at least some of the secrecy orders associated with these cases. In each of these cases, the department took advantage of outdated policies that make secrecy the norm, not the exception to the rule. In fact, these recent cases appear to have targeted journalists, Democratic members of the House of Congress, and the former White House counsel. We have no immediate way of knowing how big the problem is because each of these cases was accompanied by a DOJ-requested judge-imposed gag order that prevents anybody from talking about them for years. Now we have asked the department to explain the extent of these troubling cases, but this hearing is not about that investigation, at least not directly. Today, the committee is going to focus on a related policy problem that has troubled members on both sides of the aisle, namely that technology has vastly outpaced the law when it comes to the government demanding your data from a third-party provider, and that the gag orders accompanying those demands have become standard practice in cases where timely notice would make far more sense. In the 21st century, federal prosecutors no longer need to show up to your office. They just need to raid your virtual office. They do not have to subpoena journalists directly. They just need to go to the cloud. And rather than providing Americans with meaningful notice that their private electronic records are being accessed in a criminal investigation, the department hides behind its ability to ask third-party providers directly. They deny American citizens, companies, and institutions their basic day in court, and instead, they gather their evidence entirely in secret. Just because it is easier for prosecutors to seek sweeping amounts of data from these service providers does not mean that they should be allowed to do so. This committee has long recognized the Justice Department's need to investigate the unauthorized disclosure of classified information, and it supports those investigations whenever they are properly predicated. Our responsibility to combat leaks is not, however, carte blanche authority to engage in sweeping surveillance of American citizens, businesses, newsrooms, and universities. It was not tolerable after 9/11, and it is not acceptable now. If history and recent reporting has taught us anything, it is that we cannot trust the department to police itself. It is imperative that the committee fulfill its role and ensure our laws are keeping pace with rapidly changing technology. We need to guard against future overreach of federal prosecutors by implementing reform now. I thank our witnesses for being here today. I look forward to hearing their ideas on what reforms we should consider moving forward. I look forward to working with Mr. Jordan and our Republican colleagues on this matter. I now recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in the United States of America, the government should not spy on its citizens, plain and simple. In the limited cases when surveillance on Americans is necessary to prosecute crimes or prevent acts of terror, there should be a high burden, a very high burden for the government in getting approval to do so. What came out of the Church Committee's investigation into the FBI's rogue actions in the middle of the 20th century provided a roadmap for righting the wrongs of domestic surveillance. An entire apparatus of checks and balances was set up to hold government accountable when it sought to invade the privacy of its citizens. But this process, again, is now in need of reform. The laws and guidelines governing surveillance are opaque, antiquated, and easily skirted. Our system of warrants, subpoenas, national security letters, secret courts, and other tools at the government's disposal must be brought in line with constitutional considerations of basic due process. We've tried to make progress in recent years, but we have much work left to do. For instance, the USA Freedom Act made significant improvements to the Patriot Act to safeguard civil liberties, but many deficiencies remain, like the simple fact that the Obama FBI spied on President Trump's campaign, used a dossier that they knew to be false at the time to be able to surveil the activities of Carter Page. Further improvements, or quite frankly, a complete overhaul of FISA is something this committee should again take up. More recently, Tucker Carlson stated on his show the other night his belief that the NSA was monitoring his communications. While the NSA said in a carefully worded statement, and I would encourage all of you to read that Mr. Carlson was not the target, not a target, they didn't deny that they had reviewed his communications. Additionally, reforms to the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, or ECPA, passed the House in 2 recent Congresses, only to stall in the United States Senate. As most of our colleagues know, ECPA is the cornerstone law governing Americans' privacy with respect to email and other electronic data. The problem is that this law was written in 1986 and did not contemplate, not even close to contemplate, all the facets of our digital age today. The result has been a patchwork system of demands from law enforcement to technology companies in a constitutionally dubious fashion. Courts are split, for instance, on how to interpret parts of ECPA, and this uncertainty allows for data to be swept up by law enforcement agencies without warrants. Another area where we can work together is on protecting the public's right to know. An informed public is critical to a well-functioning democracy. When the Department of Justice prosecutes journalists or implements a gag order so that people cannot speak out about the government's actions, our democratic values are undermined. There are bipartisan bills that would protect journalist sources. This legislation was originally authored by Vice President Pence when he was a member of the House. We should revisit this legislation, and also measures related to gag orders so that the public can be as informed as possible. It should be incredibly rare in the United States that people are not allowed to speak freely about the government's actions. I look forward to today's discussion, and frankly, like the chairman said, I'm optimistic about an opportunity to work with our colleagues on the other side to make some improvement in all these areas. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I will now introduce today's witnesses. Eve Burton is an Executive Vice President and the Chief Legal Officer of the Hearst Corporation. Prior to joining Hearst, Ms. Burton served as Vice President and Chief Legal Counsel at CNN, where she oversaw all legal matters relating to news and other programming on CNN networks and websites. Previously, she was a Deputy General Counsel at the New York Daily News. She also clerked for Judge Leonard Sand in the United States District Court of New York. Ms. Burton holds a BA from Hampshire College and a JD from Columbia Law School. Tom Burt is Corporate Vice President for Customer Security and Trust at Microsoft Corporation. Among his department's many responsibilities is responding to law enforcement requests for access to data and managing Microsoft's government clearance and national security compliance. Mr. Burt joined Microsoft in 1995 and has held several leadership roles in the corporate, external, and legal affairs departments. He received an AB from Stanford University and a JD from the University of Washington School of Law. Jonathan Turley is the J.B. and Maurice C. Shapiro Professor of Public Interest Law at the George Washington University Law School. After a previous position teaching at Tulane Law School, Professor Turley joined the GW Law faculty in 1990, and in 1998 he became the youngest chaired professor in the school's history. In addition to serving as counsel in a number of significant cases, he has written numerous articles for a variety of law journals and national publications. Professor Turley earned a BA from the University of Chicago and a JD from Northwestern University School of Law. Lynn Oberlander is of counsel with the law firm of Ballard Spahr, LLP. Previously, she served as in-house counsel to numerous broadcasters, publishers, and digital platforms. She was a senior vice president and associate general counsel for media at Univision Communications, Inc., while also serving as executive vice president and general counsel at Univision's subsidiary, Gizmodo Media Group. Previously, she was the general counsel for media operations at First Look Media Works, and before that, she was the general counsel of The New Yorker, where she also wrote for NewYorker.com on media law topics. Earlier in her career, she also worked at Forbes and NBC. Ms. Oberlander received her BA from Yale University and her JD from Columbia Law School. We welcome all of our distinguished witnesses, and we thank them for participating today. I'll begin by swearing in our witnesses. I ask that our witnesses in person please rise and raise your right hand.